Hi, this is Roger. Thanks for dropping by. I found some loose clips lying around that never got used. I was putting together a video about Oncidium types and the related intergenerics and stuff, and there's enough there to put together a reasonable video. Some of the words might reference things in the past because they were filmed over a period of time, not all at the same time, so there might be some words relating to events that have long since happened. But anyway, I'm starting with that as proof of the pudding. That's a psychopsis. Yeah, well, it was once an Oncidium. That's a Miltoniopsis. It's a distant relative of an Oncidium. That's a Miltonia, distant relative. That's a Brassia, distant relative. That, which is just about to have its spikes taken off, is a distant relative, Odontoglossum. Intergeneric, yeah? Cherry baby, yeah? So anyway, I'll put the clips together and we'll see how we go. As I said, it's an excuse on my part to not filming today because these are older clips that I can just throw together, stick some pop-ups of blooms from past events and stuff and get a video together. But it's all about Oncidiums and their relatives, the care, the culture, good look at quite a few plants as we go round. So we'll take it from there. And as I go through this video, I was under the impression, just loosely, that I've got some Oncidiums, actually things that are really called Oncidiums. But on reflection, most of the ones I've got have actually had their flipping names changed. I've got a feeling that this is the only one left, Oncidium Cherry Baby. Is it? I think this is my only true Oncidium left in the collection. Whereas once upon a time I had loads, and somebody keeps pulling the mat out from under my feet and changing what they're called. So once when there were loads, I got a feeling this is it now. Humble little Cherry Baby, the only true Oncidium left. And not a species, obviously, it's a hybrid. And boy did somebody get lucky when they produced this and got the chocolate out of it. Which on a dull day like today is still there, but it's a hint of chocolate rather than an overwhelming confectionery shop cooking the stuff type smell, which is when it's in full flood. So let's get on and look at some Oncidium types. But that really is the only true one I've got left, I think. Okay, we'll start off with a thoroughbred, one that is not open to dispute. The last time I looked. This, in theory, is not only a true Odontoglossum, it's a species, yeah? And this one didn't have very good roots when I repotted it. The roots are not that big and chunky, they're sort of along the lines of being fine but not wispy. And it didn't have a very good root system, but most of the roots it had, and the pot it was previously in, was a deep pot, and it had done well in its lifespan, so I assumed that's probably just a trait, that it actually is quite deep rooted. I could be wrong, that's only going by what had gone before. This is my only one in bloom at the moment, and sadly these are going to go soon. But three nice spikes of very attractive, unfragrant blooms. But there are some blooms, the fragrance is irrelevant because the blooms are just nice to have around. And these are very delicate, pretty little spidery looking blooms. Yeah? Now whenever we get a spidery look, we automatically think Brassias. You know, the spider orchids. Well, there are others that have a spidery appearance to them that have got no relationship with Brassias whatsoever. And Odontoglossums, some of the species come into that category. You know, a lot of the trait is a very long curly lip and very long curly petals and sepals. Yeah? This plant I like a lot. Yes, it's a large plant. It's not a specimen plant, but it will be soon, providing I look after it and it does okay. Now this lives in the wrong place at the moment. Same reason for the Miltoniopsis. because it's in bloom and I want to see the pretty flowers, it's on a high shelf. Well, one, it doesn't need that amount of light, not in its true environment, and two, that's a warmer position. But, and Odontoglossums are notoriously cool growers, they don't like heat. But because it's at the front of the shelf, it gets the full force of that when it's on. It's the first plant to receive that moving air before it gets dispersed amongst the other plants. The plants up the back of a shelf don't get anywhere near as much air movement as the ones at the front. So it's okay while it's in bloom. So let's move that big monster out the way. Now these again, they've got Oncidium written on them, but they are in fact Odontoglossums. The only thing that's changed is the name. The plant stays the same. That's why it's quite important sometimes to look up the background. Yeah. Now all of these could be classed as recovering plants, looking at them, but not necessarily. That one's important to me because of its history. It's now called Oncidium alexandrae, and this is a cross with itself. Basically, it was a load of seedlings were produced, yeah, and some of them were special. As with all seedlings, they're not all the same, and you know, some come out small. Sometimes you suddenly get a bit of fragrance on one that wasn't there before. But in amongst seedlings will be some differences, and some of those are special enough to be given their own name. Yeah, that's why you see sometimes a certain plant that you know quite well, but it's got another name after it, normally in single quotes. It's because it was special. And then if you want lots more of them, you can mericlone that plant. Yeah, I mean, that's going down to virtually cellular level and smashing it to pieces and getting those pieces to grow again. In very simplistic terms, it's a lot more scientific than that. But then all the plants are clones of the original. They're identical. And that's how you can get a massive number of what started out as one. Yeah? And so that one's quite special. The previous growth I grew was a nice bulb. Now that's not as big as the previous one grown in the nursery, yeah, but not bad nonetheless. And now it's growing a new one, and until that decides to fatten up at the base, I don't know whether it's going to be that big or that big. I'll have to wait and see. But it's a semi-recovering plant. When I repotted it, the roots weren't brilliant, but since then it's produced some new ones. Yeah, so it's pulling on, but not in a brilliant state yet. And then these two, they don't have Odontoglossum anywhere near them in their naming thing until you actually work out where they came from. And this one came from exactly the same place as the previous one. It came from an Odontoglossum specialist nursery, McBean's. And it wasn't in that good a state when I got it, but it was in bloom, which is why I chose it. This was the last growth I grew, and now it's doing something else. And at the moment, it's a bit difficult to work out what it's doing. If you look at the previous bulb that bloomed, the flower spike comes out inside one of the lower leaves. That's where the spike comes from. And if you look at the new growth that's attached to it, that came out below that leaf. Yeah? So not quite sure what this one is, because it's doing half and half. Yes, it's sort of inside the lower leaf, but it's also hanging out the side of it. So this is probably going to be a new growth. If it's a bloom, I'll be over the moon. If it's a spike, but it looks too fat to be a spike. But as always, time will tell. But that's another Oncidium. Due to the renaming process, its parents are Odontoglossums. So doesn't like the heat, likes to stay cool. Here's another one. All these are in a very similar state. Okay, now this is an Oncidium crossed with, it's effectively two named parents, basically, both of which are hybrids. But if you go back and look up these two, you actually find that once upon a time, that's got more Odontoglossum in it than anything else. And as a consequence, it's a cool grower. Again, didn't have very good roots, was repotted, and it's grown some new ones along with this nice new growth. I don't think it's going to bloom. There's no sign of a spike. So I might have to wait for yet another new growth. So, you know, possibly this time next year. Could be a long way off. We shall see. So, the difference with the Odontoglossums is that they've all, almost across the board, they've all been dumped in with Oncidium. So when you buy one now, it'll be called an Oncidium. But the culture between the original true Oncidiums and the original true Odontoglossums is quite different. Oncidiums quite like some warmth. Yeah? They like reasonable light levels. They can take higher light levels, whereas Odontoglossums don't like either. They're cool growers. They don't like high light levels in the main. So by losing the ability to know the difference, we lose the culture tip. So we have to do some homework. Okay? But that's the only difference really. Odontoglossums like to be cooler with not quite so much light. So my culture for these is purely where I put them. Yeah? They go down there, where it's cooler. That's it. Culture sorted. As simple as that. Okay, these two recovering plants have got Oncidium on their label. This is the one with the big long name with me in it. Oncidium varicosum variety Rogersii Baldwin. That's a mouthful, easy for you to say. Apparently that's been renamed. It's no longer in the Oncidium direct category. It's gone into like a subgroup. Yeah? But it was once. So just because its name changes, its culture doesn't. So always, you know, try and check up your backgrounds when you get a named plant. But this was the one that had the beautiful bright yellow flowers on with the almost black top to the blooms. I'll do pop-ups as I go along. But the plant wasn't in a good condition. When I repotted it, I left it late, and what I did was I allowed the new growth to push on, because at some point this new growth will produce new roots. But because it's a new plant for me, I've only had this since March, late March, I don't know when that's going to be, because I haven't got records yet. But at some point this new growth will produce new roots. So I thought the longer I let it grow, yeah, the less time it's going to be before the new roots come out. So the less time it's got to survive on whatever's in this old bulb and the relatively poor root system that it had. It wasn't a ridiculously poor root system, there are some, so it can hydrate. But its future is in this new growth, and there are still no signs of new growth yet. But at some point it will produce new roots. So that's that one. This one, oh, everybody has heard of this one. This is Oncidium Sweet Sugar. Yeah, well, no, it's not. It's had its name changed again. So it's no longer a true Oncidium. It's in another subcategory. If you want to know, I'm afraid you're going to have to look it up yourself, because I'm not going to bother. Because to me, it's still Oncidium Sweet Sugar. Nothing's changed because somebody's changed the name. It's still going to live in the same pot, in the same shelf, and get the same care. So I'm not changing the tag. But this was one of the Ceramis plants, most of which really went downhill fast for several reasons. But not the Ceramis as such, but Ceramis in here. It was just too damp for them, and the base of the plants rotted in a lot of cases. It didn't work for me. But the future of this plant, again, like that one, is in its new growth. And what is the new growth doing now? Chucking out a new root system. And that one will too. It might take longer, and it might have to get almost mature, if not mature, before those new roots come out. But come out they will, as has this one. Now this one started producing its new roots when the new growth was quite small, about an inch, inch and a half. So the new growth started, followed almost immediately by the new roots. So by keeping that in my records, for future reference, next time I need to repot this, which won't be for a while, it's in pure Orchiata bark, it can stay in there for some time, but the next time I need to do it, all I need to do is wait for the new growth to get about an inch long and just get on with it. Even though I might not be able to see any new roots, I know they're coming soon, because that's what it did last time. It's not going to suddenly do it all differently, you know. So that's a couple of actual Oncidiums, even though they're not anymore. They were last time I looked. Let's put it that way. While I'm here, we'll have a look at some different ones. Now, leaves naturally die back on older bulbs. You can see this is two plants in here, one going that way, one going that way. Yeah, and on the oldest bulb, this leaf is dying back. The plant isn't dying, this leaf is dying on the oldest pseudo bulb, and not long after its mate will go as well. Yeah, now I don't cut these leaves off because they will fall off on their own, and then I'll just pick them up off the floor and put them in the bin. Now this one's got a spike on it. This one is one of my Wildcats. So this is an Oncidium, but it starts with on. So in amongst this is a good bit of Oncidium. What else is in there? I'm not that fussed. As long as it's not Miltonia or old-fashioned Odontoglossum, because that would say it would need to be a bit cooler perhaps. But whatever's in there, the culture and the care is roughly the same, so I can just treat it. Now this one's decided to spike on a maturing bulb. Even though that bulb's not as big as some of the previous ones, it's still going to have a go at some blooms. So I can relatively safely say that this new growth, which is a lot stronger, is going to bloom as well. And you never know, it might even push out a spike each side. Some do, some don't. Yeah? I mean, if you get down onto the Oncidium twinkles, yeah, virtually every new growth is going to push two spikes out. So if you've got a plant with 5 or 6 new growths, boy, are you in for a show down the line. They may be tiny flowers, but they're fragrant and they're attractive. But again, you know, new growth equals new roots at some point. Now on this one, it's still pushing out new roots, even though the bulb is mature enough to spike. So they come out at different times. So that's not a bad Wildcat. The centre of the plant rotted, and I rescued it by cutting the 2 leads off and sending it off in 2 directions. The next time that gets repotted, those will be separate plants. But for now, they can live in the same one. Now here's a not so good looking Wildcat. Again, Oncidium. This is Cheetah. And you see that there? That's the spike I've just cut off. And that was in bloom a long time. I should have cut that spike off. For the sake of the plant, but unfortunately, those flowers are one of my favourite. And I thought, I'll split the difference. I'll let it bloom, but I won't let the spike go to its entirety and start to die off. As soon as I see the first bloom start to fade, I'll take the whole spike off. Yeah, that'll give it a little bit of a rest. But this one now needs to push up another new growth. Yeah, that's what its next job will be. And the trigger is the fact the spike's gone. So it will now be worrying about its loss and thinking, what can I do about it? And what it can do is produce 1 or more new growths on what is not a very good root system. So hopefully it will pull back, it'll pull together. What else have we got here quickly? Alicera. That's a made-up name. And it's a made-up name that had to be done because of all the name changes in the plants that make up this complex intergeneric hybrid. There's all sorts in here. So it's lost its identity. It's lost its culture requirement by being an intergeneric. Unless all of the bits that make up that plant require the same culture, then it's got bits of all sorts in it. So all you can do is average it. Now it's an Oncidium type, well, treat it like an Oncidium, you know. And if in your care you suddenly find an intergeneric is starting to get really pale yellow leaves and it's reacting to the light level, yeah, well, that particular one probably doesn't need as much light. Well, pull it away. Deal with it, yeah? And if you suddenly see your leaves are getting a real deep, glossy green, the chances are it's not getting enough light. But for that plant, and when you get into the intergenerics, that's all you can do. Just keep your eye on the plant. Now this is doing something dramatic here. Oh, I'm not going to tear it off now because I've only got one hand. But in there is something. Yeah? Let me have a look. What did it do last time? Where did the spike come out from? It's difficult to tell. I'll have to wait and see. But this was on the iffy plant list. It was never truly confirmed as being infected, but it had been standing in the same water in the Ceramis trays with 2 or 3 that were definitely confirmed. So it had to be classed as an iffy plant. So we potted them up separately, we keep them separate for a while, and then they chuck up a nice new growth like that and chuck roots out all over the place. So I'd say it's pretty safe now. Lovely blooms on this one. I've actually got 2 of these because the plant was massive. It was a beautiful plant and then it just keeled over. So I rescued it in 2 pieces, and to give it a good chance I actually left quite a few back bulbs on. Yeah, so that it could live off of whatever was in, you know, in those back bulbs, and it seems to have done okay. It's not a bad new bulb. I don't believe it'll bloom, but you know, we'll see what that does. So that's a true intergeneric. It's got a made-up name because at least one or more of the elements within it changed their name, which meant what it used to be called, it couldn't be called anymore. And who knows? Since this name was made up to accommodate its makeup, some of its makeup could have changed again, which now means that made-up name doesn't work. Good game, isn't it? Well, some people seem to think it is. Drives me up the wall. Now here's another one. This is a Tahoma. What the hell is a Tahoma? Well, it's another one of them sort of names that had to be invented. Yeah? And that's Glacier. There's quite a few people have got that one. For the size of the plant, the blooms are massive. That was another Ceramis failure. I've been trying to get this thing to grow for about 3 years. Probably one of my longest attempts to rescue a plant. It's now rescued. It's now got a root system. It's now got a new growth on top of the previous one, which took an age to grow. So maybe one day I'll see those giant, huge, creamy green blooms with the nice coloured markings on them. It's not one of my favourite blooms, but it's pretty damn big for the size of the plant. So anyway, that's just a... Ouch! I can't show you all of them, but I'll just have a quick look around at some variables. Strictly speaking, a Brassia is a relative of an Oncidium. And if you think about what it looks like, yeah, leaves on the top of a pseudo bulb with bracts down at the base, it looks like an Oncidium. Do those look like Oncidium blooms? And do they hell? So it is in its own category. Brassias are a species in their own right, but they are related to Oncidiums. And if you think about their care, it's almost identical. They like the same levels of light. You know, they grow in a similar manner. You know, short rhizomes, pseudobulbs, progressing along and can shoot out in 2 directions occasionally. Spikes that come out from the base of the leaf, same place as Oncidium, so you can see the association there. Yeah. What else can I get at? I mean, Shari Baby. I do believe that's still called Oncidium, but I doubt it. I expect it's called something else now. And the Shelob Tolkien. That, I believe, is a Miltonia. Let's have a look. I keep forgetting. Yeah, that's a Miltonia. Now, strictly speaking, that name has had to be abandoned. And most Miltonias will now be called Brattonias. Let's have a think why. Miltonia. Well, obviously, the back end of that is Brassia. That's pretty obvious. But what's the milt on the front? Is it Miltonia or Miltoniopsis? And boy, is there a difference. And it's important to know that difference. Yeah? Whereas if you call it Bratonia. The bra bit on the front is your Brassia, and your tonia is your Miltonia bit. You've removed the ambiguity with Miltoniopsis. So Bratonia makes far more sense than Miltassia. Yeah? And you can see it's got Brassia in it as soon as you flip and look at it. Spidery nonsense at its best. And quite honestly, that is one of the better hybrids. It's easy to grow, it's pretty vigorous, and produces nice, big, beautifully patterned blooms. Yeah. I suppose I don't normally do this sort of thing, but I could recommend that one. You know, if you wanted to venture into some sort of Oncidium intergeneric type, that's not a bad one to go for. Pretty easy, or I find it easy anyway. Right, last bit then. We get on to the Miltonia and the Miltoniopsis. That is a Miltonia. It's Miltonia Sunset. So it's a named hybrid. It's big, it's blousy, but it has the Miltonia shape. What's the shape then? What is a typical Miltonia? I'll put a few pop-ups one after the other so you can get your head round the shape. The shape is a very big, wide lip. Not all of them, but that's a trait. And then the rest, the petals and the sepals, are normally quite evenly distributed and of a similar size. That is a typical Miltonia shape. That is a typical Miltoniopsis shape. Yeah? Again, quite a big, fat, wide lip, often with a groove in it, not always. And then the petals and the sepals are quite evenly balanced, but they're fatter. And they make for a more disc-like shape. So that's quite a typical Miltoniopsis shape. But what's the difference? Have a look at the leaves. Look at the colour of the leaves. They're a normal Oncidium-y type green. A normal green. Yeah? Now, these are actually a little dark at the moment because it hasn't been getting as much light as it really needs. And the reason is I'm keeping it away from the bright light that it would normally have to make the blooms last longer. So that's short term. It will get back in the light soon. Well, it would have done, but unfortunately it's decided to push yet another spike up. So it might have to stay out of the light for a bit. But if we have a look at Miltoniopsis, these are not the same colour. These have got like a silvery look to them. They're a different colour green altogether. So they are different. Now, if you really want to be absolutely pedantic, Miltonias and Miltoniopsis are one and the same. Their difference is where they come from. And there aren't many Miltoniopsis true species. I think there's only about half a dozen. There aren't many, but they come from an entirely different part of the world to where the Miltonias come from. They also come from higher up, cooler. Yeah? They also come from more heavily shaded areas, not as bright light. So their care needs to be different. They don't like getting warm. Miltoniopsis, pretty cool, keep the air moving and don't get them in intense light. And the chances are they'll do pretty good, providing you start with a reasonable one, because boy are those fussy tykes. They stress easily from every direction. That's all you need to know. Everything possible that can stress a plant will stress these, sometimes all at once. Yeah? They're prone to root loss if they're not grown in good media that they're happy with. And if the roots start failing, the whole of the rest of the plant's going to suffer. If you keep them too warm, you stress them. If you keep them too bright, you stress them. Yeah? And if you try putting all those things together, you've probably got a plant that's going to go and fail. Yeah? So if you look after them, they're not bad. But they are not the easiest in the world. Whereas this one, which is a Miltonia, and some of my other Miltonias, you'd have a job to put that flipping thing down. It's vigorous, it grows well, big blooms. Are they fragrant? I've forgotten. Slightly. but they have got competition. Oh, look at that. I've just got down to show you that, and look what I've just spotted. That was not open yesterday. Oh, I'll wait for that to open properly and perhaps another bloom, but that's actually my Phalaenopsis Sweet Memory has just opened. Yeah, I can live with that. That's going to get a bit more yellow on it as the bloom opens out and gets more light on it. It won't stay as deep a colour as that. It'll get a bit more colouring on it as it goes. Anyway, back to the subject, Roger. So Miltonias and Miltoniopsis are not one and the same, but strictly speaking they are. They just come from a different part of the world, and that difference is the difference in their culture. So once you understand that, you know how to deal with your Miltoniopsis and how to deal with your Miltonias. Okay, so that's just a chat about Oncidium types, Oncidium intergenerics, part of their makeup, the way their culture can vary. But as I said, from a culture point of view, because of the fact that I've got this place, I can de-risk my culture quite easy on when I first get the plant. Get it potted up in something it's going to like, and the next thing is simply which shelf is it going on? Is it going up here? This is a highlight shelf. It's got the brightest light coming in from above and from 2 of the 3 sides. So that's a highlight shelf. Yeah, I wouldn't put a Miltoniopsis up there, but I'm quite happy to put my Cattleyas and some of my other things up there. Believe it or not, my Deesas up there, because I've just watched Rachel's video, who grows nice Deesas, and what does she do with them? She gives them flipping bright light. She even lets them have direct light through glass, so they can take it. So that's gone up there. It was right down there. Wrong. Have a listen to somebody who grows things well, look what they do, and go along those lines. At least try it anyway. Okay? So, next level of light is down here, but little microclimates on that shelf. You've got those near the glass, get the highest light. Those tucked behind those plants get less light. It's more filtered. Yeah? Especially when you've got a big fat mount like that sat directly above them. That's why it's there. It helps the Latorias stay a little bit more shady. And then you get this one. This is a true Odontoglossum species that we looked at earlier. Yeah? That doesn't like high light levels. So what have I done? I've sat Hercoglossum right above it. So it's now dappled shade. Even though it's on a high light shelf, it, as an individual plant, doesn't get high light. This is my next highest light level. Yeah? Why is it the next one? Well, because it's farther away from that end. So it's not getting that direct light in from the right hand side. It's only getting it when the sun is on this end and through the roof. Yeah? So it's a stage back from that shelf, which is a stage back from that shelf. And then you get these. They're underneath that shelf, so they're shaded from the roof. They still get some bright light late in the afternoon through the glass, but not all day. Little microclimates. Everywhere, little microclimates. Until you get to the ultimate microclimate, which is on the floor. Why is that a microclimate? Well, first of all, it's quite heavily shaded from above. It's got 2 or 3 shelves full of plants above it. So that's not a bright light area by any means. Most important thing, that's my inlet fan. When that turns on, that's cool air, moving quite quickly. So what's sat in front of that? Miltoniopsis, a Coelogene, an Odontoglossum, which is now called a Rossioglossum, it's still an Odontoglossum, and Nelliila. And then round here on the floor, okay, the bucket's in the way in the moment, that doesn't live there, it moves. But all the rest of my Coelogenes, they don't need high light, and they need to stay cool, so they're on the floor. So they're all little microclimates. Over here, yeah, this is a lower light area, but somebody said my Paphiopedilums might do a bit better if they got a bit more light. So they got moved up towards the glass. My Restrepias don't need it, so they can be set back. Little microclimates. But if I bought a new Restrepia, I don't have to think about its culture. All I have to do is put it on that shelf with the others, because I've already done the thinking. I won't be getting any more Paphiopedilums. That's enough for me. They're not my favourites. They're too slow, too slow. So you can see the principle. The principle is based on when I get a new plant, is it a brand new genus that I've never had before? Now I've done that recently with the Bulbophyllums. I got sent some, having bought one, and I've since bought one more. I now have enough Bulbophyllums, certainly for a while. All I've now got to do is work out, are they okay where I'm keeping them? Well, they're chucking a bloom out now and again, so it can't be that bad. But they're not in a high light situation. Yeah, so maybe they're not getting enough light. I'll work that out as I go along. But at the moment, they're staying there. And they seem to be doing okay. So if I got another one, it would probably go somewhere around there, because these don't seem to be doing so bad. So I take away the need to do a culture check on every single plant I get. And it's just basically by what I've already got and what's worked in the past for me. So there we go then. That's probably ended up being quite a long one. So it's a culture video on Oncidiums that isn't. And if you've listened through, you know what I mean, because I don't need to worry about the culture of an individual plant. I just need to know which set it lives in. And it's very rare I'm going to get a plant that's going to have a set of its own, because chances are I wouldn't get it, because it's not going to fit in. Yeah? Let's end up with the star performer. You are a show-off. And may you long do it, because it's appreciated. You know me, I like me yellows. So see you next time. Bye for now.